It's my pleasure to introduce two incredible leaders in Israel, in the Israeli tech ecosystem, Michael Eisenberg and Soffer Teeni. I'll just give a quick background on both. Michael is a general partner at Aleph, a leading early-stage VC fund with $850 million under management. Aleph has invested in over 50 companies, including Lemonade, Frank, Melio, Healthy.io, JoyTunes, Fabric, and others. Prior to Aleph, Michael was a general partner at Benchmark Capital, leading their Israeli portfolio. Since 2016, Michael has written the blog 6 Kids and a Full-Time Job on topics ranging from politics to technology, Judaism, and microeconomics. He's the best. I've had the pleasure of meeting him before, and he's really great. Adi is the general manager and country lead of Meta Israel. She's also a serial entrepreneur and angel investor. Since joining formerly Facebook in 2014, Adi has grown Facebook, now Meta Israel, into a hub of innovation and R&D based in Tel Aviv. Adi serves on multiple boards, including as the executive chairman of Ginger Software, a tool that uses NLP to aid in written communication. She began her career in the Army evaluating talent at the Flight Academy and continues to evaluate and support young talent in the Israeli tech ecosystem. Please help me in welcoming Michael and Adi. Thank you so much.
He is the best.
You can't grab the microphone like that. So, good evening and welcome to Tel Aviv. This is a huge treat for me, not just because you're here, but because Adi and I get together on a reasonably frequent basis to talk about challenges in the Israeli ecosystem, the global tech ecosystem. At the beginning of COVID, we worked on a project together called Medina Mofet in Hebrew, Exemplar Nation, to try to bring tech thinking to solve local social and economic problems. And she's one of the foremost leaders in our tech ecosystem and beyond. And I'll say something personal. She has the biggest heart that you've seen on anyone, a tremendously large, warm heart. So I'm thrilled to be here with you. Thank you. I want to start, we're just going to chat, and you can be listeners, and by the way, because it's Israel, you can also interrupt and ask questions. You may have noticed that walking around, people are yelling most of the time. As I recruited people for my tech companies, who are foreigners or non-Israelis, and come to Israeli things, said, what's the one cultural thing I need to know? And the answer is, you need to be worried when the Israelis are not yelling at you, because it means they don't care. So you can feel free to interrupt. So, I'm going to start with actually a hard question that they asked me to get to at the end. But one of the things that was left off of Adi's bio is she leads a group of successful women in this country in mentoring young women to be not entrepreneurs but CEOs. And why don't you describe what you do and describe what you think some of the challenges are, particularly for women, in becoming CEOs of tech companies?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to start by saying that I'm very grateful for this friendship. Yes, for many years, and not often you get to say it in front of many people, so here I go. I'm very, very grateful. We have Michael is an unbelievable leader in the Israeli tech ecosystem, but being his friend means a lot to me. So very, very privileged to be here with you, and on any stage and backstage we get to do stuff together. So what do we do with women? So actually the idea came based on a few things. First of all, I think that more than anything, for many years, hating that question and being very pissed off when being asked since I was very young. So I've been CEO of companies from a very young age, so you can imagine that getting the question on women and women leadership was something that I've been asked many times, invited to talk about many times, nominated for many things based on me being a woman for many times. for many years it pissed me off, mainly because I felt that it's like we keep the problem alive. Like the feminist movement happened, check, train left the station, check, everyone knows women are smart as men, check, let's move on. There's other things that we need, other social things we need to do.
Smarter.
Smart, yes.
Smarter.
Smarter.
Yeah.
No, but even as smart, check. You know, that it's like, it's my parents' generation movement, not mine anymore. And I also remember one time seeing an interview in the US with a very strong senior women leader, and she was asked the question how she does it all, how she combines everything together. And she literally ripped the mic and left the interview in the middle, and she said that it's an inappropriate question because she's only being asked that, being a woman, being a mom. And I remember thinking at the time that she's really brave. And now, I would probably say that it's one of the most important questions that needs to be asked. And the only ask would be from the interviewer is to make sure that they ask us, both men and women. It's one of the most important questions someone needs to ask anyone that leads a very intense career and have a family. We just need to make sure we ask both parents the question. The reason why I started this program and the reason why this became suddenly a top of mind for me, which I deal with every single day, was the data. So you're doing an MBA, so numbers means a lot to you, and they do to me as well. And when you look at the data, the shocking reality is that the data hasn't changed in the last 20 years. The feminist movement changed dramatically. Listen, it's like we are in a very different world today than what it was 20 years ago when it comes to the perception, when it comes to the insight, when it comes to kind of like this theoretical discussion on women equality. But in reality, the data, when it comes to looking at top leaders, hasn't changed all over the world. In Israel, the data is shocking, but it's also very, very similar in the US. So we have 50% women in universities, actually more, 60% women in universities, across all faculties these days.
And in government,
yes.
Significantly higher percentage.
Yes. 50% women in the workforce. So when you think about this kind of like funnel, it starts really strong. And in the most prestige roles, you have 50% women at the beginning of the journey. And then it drops. So only in Israel, only 35% team leaders, only 20% VPs, women VPs, and then only 5% women CEO, and only 9% women entrepreneurs. And you ask yourself how, and that's the same data as it was when my 21 years old girl was born. So 21 years ago, I thought that talking about women in senior roles is not going to be a topic that would be relevant when she's going to get into the workforce. And it's as relevant, not a bit, hasn't changed a bit. So this is how it started. So that was like top of mind for me for many years now. What the hell is going on? And what do we need to do to change it? And I would say that the first thing that we need to do to change it is stop being politically correct. Is stop saying nice things. Is stop being afraid to go all in the problem. Otherwise, we're going to be really politically correct and stand here in 20 years from now, and the data is going to be exactly the same. And the second thing I realized is that we need to cheat a bit. So obviously, going to the beginning of the journey, time after time, is really important. Going to girls at like elementary school is really important, and changing education is really important, and changing us as parents is really important. But we also need to cheat because it's going to take time. And I was thinking, how can we cheat? And then I saw another presentation, not related at all, actually related to work. It was about UI UX, with actually one of the top UI UX experts in the world. And they came to the concept of how to use UI UX to improve conversion. Everyone knows like web conversion, and yeah, that makes sense, right? So they looked at the conversion question and thinking about how you optimize UI UX for conversion. And he gave a really good example. He said, imagine that you have a big room, massive room like this, and you have one door that everyone goes in, and then one door that everyone goes out. And you want, the conversion is for as many people as possible to go out. That's the conversion. So out, you're converted, okay? And in, you enter the funnel. And he said, what would be the best way to improve conversion? To try to get more people into the room, or to try to get 3 people that are just near the exit and push them out. Right? That's basically the basics of how you improve conversion funnels in the internet. You go to the end of the funnel and you improve the last mile. By improving the last mile, you immediately improve conversion rates. That doesn't mean you don't want more people in the room. Of course you do. But if you want a quick win, that's the quickest win. Is to go to the door and push the people that are just before converted, buying, whatever, push them out, okay? And if you focus on that last mile, you can actually improve conversion better. And then I realized that this is what we need to do with women. So, on top of all the amazing programs...
She doesn't mean push them out the door.
No. I mean,
I just want to be clear.
yeah, I realized that we need to take the top, really strongest women that are already not far from the end of the funnel. Okay, so sitting in director's position and VP's position that already have this career path, and just make sure that they sit all the way through, that they become these top leaders, that they sit at the decision-making table, just to push them. And if we take this like at the end of the funnel and just push them to these roles, we're going to improve dramatically the numbers. That doesn't mean we don't need to do also bringing more women into the room, but that's what we did. And basically, we took the the top of the top of the top CEO, entrepreneur, VC women in Israel. We made them mentors in the country, and then we interviewed a lot of mentees. These are the next generation, the next women, and we matched them. And it's the 5th year, and it's unbelievable to see the outcome. Really unbelievable. So I'm very
It's moving the needle.
Yeah.
It's really moving the needle. So what I want to ask you now is, okay, that feels like something that can be done anywhere, but the business students that came here came to understand what's different about Israel in that story that would be different in San Francisco or New York or London. What do you think is different about Israel in that story that wouldn't happen as well in New York or San Francisco or London? Remember, we're not being politically correct.
It took me 10 minutes to get the top women CEO, leaders, government in the country to say yes. 10 minutes. So now we have so many applications. I wanted to increase the list on the 5th because we simply can't choose. There's so many unbelievable women. I wish I could hire all of them that are applying to become mentee. Everyone knows it's a life-changing program, so everyone wants to get in. So I wanted to increase the number of mentors. Just now, this last week, I was sitting with one of my team members that is responsible for the program, and we created a list of additional, let's say, 7 strong women leaders. I'm talking about top of the top of the top, the people that are in the financial newspaper every day, yeah? Like 2 minutes, and they were all in. That's it. It's like as easy as it is to get the people commit. It's based on friendship. You know, it's me saying I need you, and they say tell us when and where, and we are there.
I want to drill down on this point for a second because I think it's an important cultural phenomenon in Israel that's hard to understand.
When did you ask me to come to speak here? No, seriously.
2 days ago?
Yeah. Now, Michael said, you imagine my calendar is packed, yeah? I don't see my daughter in 2 days, in 2 days time, yeah? So, but Michael asked, so I come. This is how it works, yeah? He says, I need you to come, it's important. I don't ask questions, I come.
And that mutuality, there is a circle of mutual responsibility and trust in this country that's created when you turn up for something that's not about you. And it's about improving the content and the quality of society that is remarkable. I found it times when I was an investor in a company, I won't mention the name, they actually had an Israeli competitor. That happens a lot because all the technology people come out of the same military units, they often come out with similar ideas. And so it's not once or twice or 3 times that you've had 2 leading companies in the space and both are out of Israel and like 2 blocks away from each other here. And our company was attacked, had a cyber attack from the Free Syrian Army. You may have seen that. and they took us down. And the competitive companies sent over engineers to come help our company get back up and on its feet.
Competitor,
A
yeah.
competitor, direct competitor. And that's something you don't see in other places, but there's this mutuality and mutual responsibility to make sure that everybody succeeds better. That's really, I think, a hallmark of Israeli society.
Yeah, and friendship, real friendship as a value that we are not shy from, that like is basically how, it's our operating system. Like how we operate. It's based on being friends. It's just an easier way or more natural way, or just the way for us to do things. It can be do great things together, it can be do business together, and it can be being competitors. But it's really based on friendship. I consider the CEO of Google in Israel one of my best friends. We are competitors. Believe me, and I'm winning, believe me.
You don't want to compete with it.
But he's a friend, he's a friend.
So I have 4 daughters, and 4 sons. But we'll talk about the daughters first, and then I want to go to the sons. And so they're growing up now in the Israeli tech ecosystem. My daughter is a product manager at a startup company. What's going to be different here in 10 years for them?
All right, so, like, how old is Drew? Throw numbers.
Late 20s, early 30s, roughly?
Yeah, perfect.
There we go.
Perfect.
That daughter's almost 28.
So it goes back to what I said before. My concern is that when we are going to look at the top of the pyramid for my 2 girls, for your 4 girls, 10 years from now, looking at entrepreneurs, CEOs, senior leaders, in tech and in non-tech. So this is not tech related. I think the tech has its own issues, but to be honest, it's the same problem. I think the main issue is what would they do when there's going to be a stick with 2 lines and it's not going to be COVID. It's going to be pregnancy. And I think that's the big question. And for your 4 boys, it's going to be an unbelievable moment in life, and that would have very, very minimal impact on their career. It's not going to even cross their mind asking, should I start my own startup? Because there's a stick with 2 lines. Should I apply for a new role? Should I do relocation? Should I take a really kind of like sexy responsibility in the organization that would require me to stay late at night? It's not going to cross their mind for most boys, most guys. And unfortunately, and this is the research I've done, because to the question of why the hell things didn't change in the last 20 years, despite the fact that the feminist movement is so embedded, rooted in everything we believe in, all of us, right? Like if someone thinks that women are less smart than men, they don't belong anymore. And still, at the top of the pyramid, we don't see enough women. So the answer, there's many answers, but one is that we are simply not walking the talk. We are talking the talk amazingly. Amazingly, women and men, amazingly. We're not walking the talk. And the way we are not walking the talk is in these 10 years that you are all entering very soon, what I call the 30 to 40. Those are the most important 10 years in your career. Yeah, some make it after 40, some make it before. But on average, 30 to 40 are the most important years in your career. Every year is like a dog year. It equals 7 in everything. In how fast you move, in the roles you get, in the experience, in salary. Like the salary is very low at the beginning, but it doubles very, very fast.
Now when you have a Stanford MBA, they get paid really well paid.
Still, 10 years down the road is going to be a lot higher. Every year is really, really important. And what happened also between the age of 30 to 40? Family. And I think that if we want to walk the talk, we need to understand that the reality in 2022 is still that the women plays the CEO of the house more than her husband does. I'm not sure the houses you grew up, but I grew up and my parents are both amazing, but my dad helped my mom. He used that language. I'm helping your mom. Okay, I'm helping mom. I'm helping mom with the groceries, I'm helping mom with the kids. He's not helping mom. Okay, it's not her job. So, in 2022, we still are in a position that women plays the formal CEO of the house. And if we're not going to change it 10 years from now, our daughters will have amazing roles, but they are not going to be at the top of the pyramid. And it's all on all of us to make sure. And again, don't get me wrong. It's like I think that being a parent is probably the most amazing things in my life. And I think that making a decision to devote yourself to being a parent is an amazing decision. But I think that most women don't make that decision. It just happens. Life happens. They slow down. They think that taking a couple of years, kind of like, to slow down, go to half part-time job, or take a few years and stay at home, wouldn't mean a lot. But then there's another stick with 2 lines, and another kid comes, and 10 years go by, sometimes 15. And by the age of 45, it's very, very, very difficult to go back to the same kind of like pace and kill it. So the main message I want to tell all of you, and I'm saying it to everyone, it's like to the guys, okay, the same as to the women, because you are going to have daughters, and you want to raise them in a world that they are going to have an unbelievable opportunities, and that they can both be parents and have unbelievable careers. And to do that, we need 2 CEOs in the house, and then we can have 2 CEOs in the career. But we need to have real 2 CEOs in the house that knows how to drive, not just because men drive better, but also because they know how to get to the kindergarten. Because this is when men forget how to drive really well. So we really need to walk the talk.
I'm going to go high somewhere right now.
Yes. We really need to walk the talk. I'll finish with telling you that a recent research done in the US looking at the top women leader in the US, top of the top, like Kamala Harris type, research them. And the research shows that they hold 7x more household than their spouses. The top women leader in the US, holding the top roles, holds 7x more household than their spouses. This is what we need to change. Being a parent doesn't mean like playing on the weekend with them and thinking you're amazing. It means changing diapers. It means staying at home when the kid is sick. It means going to the kindergarten for holiday and not just sending you one. And once that happens, both parents, and it's difficult, going back to the question on how do you do it all, it's really difficult. It's difficult. It's difficult for you. You're an unbelievable dad. Michael is an unbelievable dad. And he runs one of the best VC in the country. It's difficult. It's really difficult. But if you don't nail it in these 10 or 15 years, 30 to 45, it's going to be very, very difficult to nail it after. So if you want to have an unbelievable career and be a parent, and I really hope you want both, you need to do it together with your spouse, men or women. And you need to understand that it's a difficult journey, but doing it on your own is even more difficult. Yeah?
Now we'll get interesting. I'm going to follow on what Adi said, but say something different that may be too late for some of you given your age. I recently published a book called The Tree of Life and Prosperity. It came out in English and written in Hebrew already 2 years ago. And it got me called to a lot of college campuses. So I did Harvard and MIT, Princeton, and Penn, and Emory, and a bunch of others. And some on Zoom as well. And I recently did Georgetown, which was videoed and put online, what I'm about to tell you right now. I agree with just about everything that Adi said.
You see the bat? You hear the bat? It's coming.
It's coming. But I think finding the 2 lines on the stick in your 30s makes it exactly the challenge that Adi talked about. And I think we've made a bad trade-off. And this may be, again, too late for you. People should, in my view, women in particular, be getting married and having children earlier in their 20s because it opens up a long life of a career. I know, I heard the snicker already. And life, to Adi's point, is full of trade-offs. It really is. There's no work-life balance in life. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Everything in life is a trade-off. And I've seen in my own career and anecdotal evidence families, couples that have chosen to have children younger versus having them later, and it's actually professionally, because you get to those critical years, better for both spouses to have children and families and start families and grow together with your spouse before you're a fully formed person at those earlier years. And I know that sounds like a really radical comment in the current state of the United States and other countries around the world, but I think we need to get there. And
Statistics to support that, or
statistic to support which part of what?
that it's better for women in their career to get pregnant earlier?
No, because so few people have been doing it and been pursuing careers, but my anecdotal evidence looking around Israel, you see this almost nowhere in the United States, suggests that that's true. Yes, and by the way, for what it's worth, there was a recent Wall Street Journal article, which you can look up, examining the successes of marriage for people who get married in their early 20s rather than those that get married later, and the results are stunning. And
So this is going to be an Israeli discussion.
you see, this is great. I said that was going to get interesting.
Totally disagree. Totally. But that's fine. That's great. Yeah, we can argue now forever. I totally disagree. I think the solution is to
Public disagreement in Israel is totally normal.
to do it together. Is to understand that it's tough, and you need to start a family when you're ready, when you find the right person to do it with, and when you feel you're ready. And sometimes it's at the age of 25, and sometimes it's at the age of 35. But I think that understanding that to do that while having a career is tough.
It is.
It's the toughest thing, and both couples needs to really do it together. I think that once that happens, it's still tough. It just makes it suddenly something you can actually do. You know that in Meta, we've changed. When was that? A few years ago. The kind of like the way we work to a position where men get 4 months maternity leave, paternity leave. Okay, 4 months. So we've announced it, and the first person to go on paternity leave was Mark, actually. And it's funny because he realized he wanted it when he had a child, okay, and then he changed it for everyone in the company. I can't explain to you how that little thing, listen, 4 months or 6 months in the life of a child is nothing, okay? The first few months are easy. I have a 21 years old. That's difficult. First few months is easy. First years are easy.
You know, there's a great Yiddish expression about that. You know that?
There's what?
Little children, little problems. Big children, big problems.
Exactly. People don't get it. If you don't get it at the first few years, you will never get it. So, no, it's easier at the beginning. But, so it's not about the paternity, maternity leave. It's about the fact that from day one, the two couples are signaling to each other and to themselves that they're doing it together. That is changing so much. The fact that suddenly, as an employer, as a CEO, I have all my men guys go for 4 months paternity leave, and suddenly, when I need to give a project to someone, okay, and now we are not politically correct, and both are going to have, both the women and the men are going to have a baby, it's the same. I would need to wait a few months until they come back, and I need to trust them that they will figure it out, okay? This is changing so much. The fact that really walking the talk means that you guys will go to paternity leave when you're going to have a child. And you will figure it out. Okay? And it means that as women, it's the decision that you are going to manage your career. And as much as it's going to be really, like everyone will tell you, slow down a bit. Don't take that project now. Don't apply for the role now. You're just pregnant. Why to apply for the role now? You're not going to get it. Go and get it. Pregnant, not pregnant, go and get it. With a little baby at home, go and get it. And then figure it out, and it's tough. So I think that that's the main thing. We need to start walking the talk. We are talking the talk amazingly. We really need to start to walk the talk. So by the time that we're going to meet here in your next visit to Israel, there's going to be many women CEOs, many women entrepreneurs, many women leaders.
I want to change gears for a second and ask a question. How many of you are going to work in the United States after you finish business school? How many of you are from the United States? So there are more people working in the United States after business school than who are from there. Why? So someone here raised their hand. Was it you? Are you from the U.S.?
I'm from the U.S., yeah.
You are not right in front of you here.
I'm from the U.S.
You are from the U.S. So down from the U.S. here, you're staying anywhere to work afterwards. Why are you staying?
The opportunities.
The opportunities. So you think there are better opportunities in the U.S. than wherever you came from? Economic opportunities, I assume professional opportunities.
Yeah, I think the economic value, especially after paying for the MBA, are more immediate in the U.S. than where I'm from. I'm from Nigeria.
From Nigeria. I have a good friend in Nigeria, you know Future Africa?
Yeah.
He's such a good man. So he was just here. He came to visit a couple months ago. So I'd love for you to tell them why they should consider doing their first job at a business school in Israel and not in America.
So many reasons. So who is here going to go for tech? You know, like startup tech, yeah. And give me other directions.
Who's going to automotive? Right.
Yeah, no, don't think.
Who's
So,
going to Procter & Gamble?
so
Who's going to Wall Street?
Yeah, right.
All right. Where are the rest of them working? Startup? Maybe nothing? They're having babies.
So no tech, and so what else? Whoever the
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Give us healthcare. How many people go to healthcare? Small number.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
Investment.
Climate.
Climate. perfect.
Climate.
Yeah, climate is pretty much tech, but okay.
Depends which side you're on.
All right, cool. So I think that, first of all, for whoever wants to play with this idea of working in the tech ecosystem, startup ecosystem, there's not a lot of ecosystem that are as vibrant and crazy as Israel is. So I'm sure that you heard the data, right? You heard the data about Israel? So you know that 2021, we had $25 billion invested in Israel, which is equivalent to 25% of everything invested in Europe together, just in Israel.
Those of you who don't know, there's only like 9.5 million people in this country. It's about the size of New Jersey.
And,
Prettier, but it's about the size.
and the investment in the country were a quarter, a third of all the investment in all of Europe together. Just to understand how crazy it is. There's almost 10% of the unicorns in the world, 9 billion people in the world. 10% of the unicorns in the world are in Israel. So from a tech perspective, it's the highest condensity of startups in the world. It's the highest VC per capita in the world. It's the highest engineer per capita in the world. It's third in NASDAQ. Okay, so NASDAQ is basically the tech exchange, stock exchange. Who is first in NASDAQ, do you know? Who is the country that has the highest amount of listed companies in NASDAQ? Tech companies in NASDAQ. US. Okay, so it's a good choice, not a bad choice. US has how many people? 330 million, yeah? Second in NASDAQ, second country in terms of how many companies are in NASDAQ?
Israel.
China, yeah, how many people? 1.4 billion, yeah? Third, Israel, 9 million, yeah? Fourth in NASDAQ? All of Europe together. Someone said Germany. All of Europe together. So you take all of Europe together, they are number 4 after Israel. Yeah, so it's a crazy, crazy ecosystem for entrepreneurship, for innovation, for startups, for tech. There's no single multinational that doesn't have an R&D hub in Israel.
Multinational, in this case, meaning big tech companies.
Yeah, big
like
tech companies.
Meta, Google, Salesforce, Amazon,
Microsoft,
Apple.
Amazon, yeah, like hundreds, there's hundreds of tech multinationals. All of them would have a huge hub here in Israel. Probably their second largest outside of the US is going to be here, for some of them even bigger than the US. And so it's an unbelievable. You walk in Rothschild, you walk in Tel Aviv, you talk to people, so probably 1 out of 3 is an entrepreneur, and then the other 2 work for one. Yeah, that's the country. I'm married to an entrepreneur, and my 2 girls, if they want mommy to be happy, will become entrepreneurs. and so it's an unbelievable tech environment. But what makes it really special, unlike a lot of the tech companies in the US, and I work for one, which I love, is that it's an extreme disruption mindset, which is based on giving people not 100% accountability and responsibility, but 200%. It's really based on empowering the people that work for the startup, on massive empowerment. And it starts, and we can talk about it, it starts rooted in the country existence and the country history. It's rooted in the army. So the first experience you have with being empowered with a responsibility that is bigger than your life is when you reach the age of 18. My daughter is in the army right now. And I look at her and what she does in normal life, she would do in 20 years from now. The amount of responsibility she has, I'm telling you, she's brilliant. But she would do it 20 years from now when she's going to leave the army in like civil life. And she get to do it at the age of 18, now she's 20. But it's crazy. The amount of responsibility, the 2 years for me, 2.5 years I've been in the army, I'm 50. This was 30 years ago. Are the most important 2.5 years of my life, by far. And I've done quite amazing work. And I would still say that these 2.5 years made me who I am. And the outcome of that is that the way startups and tech companies are being built in Israel is by really putting a lot of focus and trust on the people we hire from very early on. So a small team and the amount of responsibility the team gets, even if they have no experience on actually making it right is crazy. It's really, really big. We actually, when the companies get really big and we need people to do very like clear siloed function, this is where we fail. We don't know how to do that well. We don't know how to give someone to do that and to do only that. That's simply not Israeli. In a minute, someone would want to do that and that and that and that as well. And also the leaders would expect people to have this kind of like more 360 responsibility. So it's an unbelievable place for young people to develop because from very early on they get to play a much bigger role than the role itself. A much, much bigger role than the role itself. And when they don't, they simply don't succeed. Okay, if they're only going to do what they've been hiring to do, they will be fired in this ecosystem. So yeah, and the food is so much better than yours. I'm sorry, guys. So much better.
And the coffee.
Weather, and the coffee, and the food, and the weather. Yeah, and the beach, and Tel Aviv. Yeah.
What's your name?
Amanda?
Amanda.
What are some of the challenges for immigrants coming to Israel to work in this environment?
Oh, I can answer that question. As you can hear, I didn't go up here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start from the end story, which is you don't have a network when you come here, right? Wherever you go up, you go to business school, wherever you've gone through, you have a network. And if you are Israeli and you've gone through the military, you have a network. People in your unit, people that you went through basic training with, people you go through officer school with. Adi's daughter's about to graduate officer school, so after being in her unit, she now met another 200 or 300 amazing young people in officer school, and those all become a giant network that you can call on at any time to do anything. And when you are an immigrant, you do not have that. That was one of my big challenges when I got here. Yeah, a really, really, really big challenge. So I always told myself I was going to go do something about it at some point. So 2.5 years ago, when I started to ask this question, which is, what would it take to get you to take your first job in Israel? I looked at the data and saw that even people who come here, 2/3 of them go back to country of origin after their first job. And I assume it's for the exact same reason that I did. I was fired from my first job and couldn't find a job back in 1994. It took me 5.5 months to find a job. I actually couldn't find one. I had to start something. And I started to fix that. And so 2.5 years ago, I launched a professional network called Nevo. And I will give you the background. The word Nevo is named after Mount Nevo, which is on the other side of the Jordan River in Jordan. It is where Moses went up to at the end of his life and died as he saw the promised land but never made it there. And the answer was, this was going to be kind of the answer to people who never get across into the promised land and managed to stay here and settle here. And we created a professional network of immigrants, what are called here Olim, people who go up in high tech. And the plan is, one, to create you a cohort of people which you didn't have before you didn't do the military in those cohorts. You get an Israeli mentor. Now, Israeli mentors come with a giant network and cohort of people that they trust. And so if I have a cohort of 30 immigrants, and then I get 30 mentors to mentor these people, I actually now have a network of about 10,000 people that are accessible to all of these immigrants. And then they get skills, both of integration into Israeli society, field trips to things that all Israeli teens did, but no immigrant ever did. Like go out and do a hike on your own in the desert when your parents aren't paying attention. My teenagers do that. I'm sure yours do as well. And they do all these kind of Israeli experiences as part of this while getting professional training, such as public speaking and storytelling, etc. And it's been thankfully very successful. We have way more demand than we can accommodate. But here's an open invitation. Anyone who decides to do the first job in Israel, you're invited to the network.
So this is amazing, but I actually would probably say that being part of the crazy ecosystem doesn't just require coming over. Because for the vast majority of the Israeli tech and startups, the first market they go to is the US. So I always say that we actually deserve another star on the flag, that is to be Israel, because we are an extension of the US in many ways. And that's the first market. So if you think about Lemonade, if you think about many of these Wix, Waze, many of these amazing tech companies, whether they are more consumer, internet, or whether they are more deep tech companies, their number one and primary market is the US, and that means that they are building teams in the US. And that's very difficult. For us to build teams in the US is very difficult, and then to find young talent that can actually join and build the US location and build the US strategy is amazing. And many times that is becoming the main hub. So Israel is a small hub and the US is becoming actually the main hub of Israeli startups. So that's another way. And I think that one of the things that I would love is to make sure that it's easier for Israeli startups to get top talent in the US, to work with them, for them, partner to them, become co-founders. Like co-founders of one Israeli, one American, that would have been unbelievable. And then sky's the limit, like conquer the world, you know. So that's another way. It's not necessarily just like moving here, because I get that that's sometimes tough. Even though I promise, as I said, food and weather are going to be amazing. But it's tough. But being part of what's happening here is actually really easy, because US is a huge, that's like the first step outside of Israel is going to be US. And that's going to be the first international hire. It's going to be someone American. And they're going to be smart people like you.
Go ahead. What's your name?
Mackenzie.
Mackenzie?
I'm curious how that answer changes or shifts with the company that you build, Nouveau. If you don't practice Judaism and you come to Israel as a Christian or practicing another religion, is that an even greater hurdle, a bigger challenge? How have you seen that play out?
The answer is I think there's a bunch of cultural issues that are easier understood in a Jewish context. That having been said, there's a small minority of people who've come who are not Jewish, who have been well integrated into the startup ecosystem. We have a bunch of our companies and other places. Does that add another challenge? I think the answer is yes. Is everything that he said about being part of this amazing economy, ecosystem, still valid? I think the answer to that is also yes.
And also separate between practice Judaism, religious and not religious. Okay? I'm a very, very secular person. And obviously being Jewish, and it's a country, you know, with all the history and the complexity, is definitely a country that is the country of the Jewish people. But we need to separate between being part of the Jewish people and practicing Judaism, which is very different. And we have people here that are religious and non-religious, and I think that Israel is on the one hand very Israeli, but on the other hand also very global, because remember that our economy is based on technology. That's the number one engine of the economy, is tech, is technology.
50% of exports and 31% of tax revenue comes from tech.
Come from tech, okay? And tech is global. It's not local. We don't do tech for 9 million people. We do tech for 9 billion people. So I think that I think that working with Israeli companies, and I have many like both of us, have many friends and startups that have massive American teams working for them, and it's an unbelievable experience. Talking to my American friends, I know how many of them love that experience. It's a slightly different experience than working for an American company, for good or bad. It's a more of a roller coaster, and yeah, it's I think that some gaps in culture is that Israelis argue a lot. It takes time for Israeli. I'm working for an American company. I know that I still mess up. Like 8 years, I still don't speak American. Yes, no, but so Israelis have very healthy disrespect to authority by nature. It's like we grew up with not a lot of respect to authority, and that is kind of like, again, the operating system. This is how we argue, and we push and we disrupt, and that's why it's very flat. It's really non-hierarchy. It's a very flat culture and organization, which is really good for startups. Yeah, like hierarchy doesn't make sense.
Even in the military, people challenge their commanders very, very openly here.
Yeah, actually, there's a law in the Israeli army. It's the only army that for certain things, if you're not challenging your commander, you can go to jail. Not your commander. If you should have challenged them and you didn't, you can go to jail. Okay, this is how healthy the disrespect to authority here is in Israel. It's serious. It's like kids in school would not speak nicely to the teacher. The comment we would give them is that they should argue with the teacher, just use nice words. But saying you're wrong is something that makes Israeli parents proud, not the opposite. Okay, just don't say you're stupid. Okay, but just say I think you're wrong. And from very early on, that is like really, really common. So I think that those are the gaps, more than
Religion.
Okay, it's a little bit the rough on the edges, being super direct. Again, working for an American company for a long time, I totally didn't get what they're telling me. It's like, they said it's nice, I thought it's nice, and I didn't get that it's being polite. They said, this is really great. They said, fine, they approved it. And only finding out that no one did, so why did you say it's great? They actually didn't say it's great. They were just like, this is not happening here. You say it's bullshit when it's bullshit, you say it's bad when it's bad, you say it's great, when you say it's great, you mean it's great. It's like, so this is a little bit the gaps that needs to be closed, but not religious.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to double click on what do you see as the biggest scaling challenges when Israeli companies do make that leap to the U.S. and whether it's by function or whatever? I'm assuming this is a huge value add.
Yeah.
Right. And then I guess on the flip side too, U.S. startups who hire Israeli engineering teams, what do they get wrong? I'm just sort of curious, just to hear your perspective on that.
Okay, so there's a couple of things here. Number one, it's really important to keep in mind that Silicon Valley is 60 years old, and Israel is less than 30. It's 25 years old as a tech ecosystem. And it turns out that you need, iterations and reps to get a lot of the pieces right. Part of it's funding. Now, there's a lot of funding here. But part of it is scale. How many times have people seen true scale? And the answer in Israel, because we've been around for 25 years, and for the first 15, 17 years of this ecosystem, we sold our companies young to Cisco, Microsoft, Oracle, kind of you name it, Apple. We didn't build those scale companies, not the muscle of scaling. And so we're still in the early phases of having enough talent that knows how to scale that actually got acquired by those big American companies and then came back to startups to try to scale them. And it's just the initial phases. And we'll have a lot more of that as these years go on because we get more mileage on the tech ecosystem. Someone like Adi who ran a big business at Facebook didn't exist here 5 years ago. Didn't exist. A big consumer internet business didn't exist 5 years ago. And now we've got a few. Not a lot. It's still a small country.
It's big. It's not small anymore.
I'm from America. It's much bigger. So I think that's kind of one thing that's very important to keep in mind. The second thing is,
I want to maybe, you're in Israel, so I want to also give you a little bit the background of the tech ecosystem, because I was thinking about you saying Silicon Valley and starting to think how come Silicon Valley became the Silicon Valley 60 years or 70 years ago. What was the root cause? I don't know the answer. I know the answer, what is the root cause Israel became the startup nation and why it's one of the most successful tech hub in the world today. And I actually would love to make sure that we are not finishing this session without you understanding that, because I think it makes the story of the tech ecosystem here really special. And it's actually do you know the name Startup Nation? Do you know why it's called Startup Nation? Right, so people think that it's because of the startup ecosystem, highest density of startups, highest all those highest. But it's not. It's actually because of my grandparents' generation. Actually, my grandparents. It's them. It's about them. So from my dad's side, his mom came from Russia. His dad came from Poland. They came a little bit before the Holocaust, and they are the only survivors. So my dad grew up not knowing what grandparents are. He didn't know what uncles or aunts or cousins are. He only had his mom and his dad. And his parents only had one child because they wanted to make sure that if one day this startup called Israel is not going to be successful, because no one knew at the time if it will or it won't, they will be able to run fast if someone will come and try to do a re-show of the Holocaust in Israel. They can grab him and run. They knew from their family that families with many kids had to make a choice on who to keep and who not to, or who to save and who not to. They didn't want to have that choice to make, so they only had one child, and they said, if we need to run, we will just grab him and run. Like him, something to bread and run. Both of them came with really prestige houses, university degrees, PhDs, and both of them met each other while building roads, literally physically building roads. They are the entrepreneurs of this country. Okay, they were these crazy people that came here either before or after the Holocaust with the dream and vision to have a country for the Jewish people. And on the day Israel was announced, do you know how many people lived here? So today we have 9-point-something million people. 74 years ago, actually May, so right now. So 74 years ago, Israel was announced, actually in Rothschild, just in the building near Meta's office in Israel. It was announced by Ben-Gurion. How many Israelis lived in Israel at the time? 600,000. Okay, half of them are Holocaust survivors. Half of them were here before the Holocaust, so half of them are sick and fragile and lost everything in their life. And 10 hours after Israel was announced on Friday at 4 o'clock. And 10 hours later, Saturday early morning, war began. Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Saudi. 5, 6 bigger countries, armies marching to Israel. And this is not to talk about politics. I'm a very, very left-wing person. This is just to talk about the history that was happening. Put for a second these armies marching to Israel, 600,000 people, half of them are Holocaust survivors. Now let's talk about the country itself. So you've been here a little bit. It looks amazing. But what you need to know is that it's tiny. It's tiny. It's 10 hours, not even 10. Yeah, 8 hours north, south. It's 10 hours for me because I drive slow. Probably 6 for you.
The roads aren't that good.
Yes, but 8 hours, and then the narrower is 20 minutes, east to west, 20 minutes. Okay, tiny country. No water at all. So we have a small lake in the north called Kinneret. You will look at it, you will laugh that we call it a lake. It's you will say that it's a drop of water. But we call it a lake, and we know exactly what's the level of the sweet water. Every Israeli kid will tell you if it's above 2 meters, below 2 meters, because it's the only sweet water we have in the country. Okay, so no sweet water.
By the way, just to add on to that, 1939, if my memory serves me correctly, the UK High Commissioner commissioned a report and said that there would never be more than 2 million people between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, because there would never, ever be enough water to
Water, yeah.
feed those people, ever.
So there's no water. I know that you are now when there's winter and you see some water. There's no water, okay? It's desert. We are basically desert. The land is really bad because we have the sea sand from the Mediterranean, and then from the south we have the desert. From Egypt we have the desert. So really good, really bad soil that you can't grow anything on it. And then to make it really bad, we are the only country in the Middle East that doesn't have oil. Okay, so the only country in the Middle East with no oil, no natural resource at all, really good bad land that you can't grow anything, no water, and now going back to my first story, 5 big Arab countries marching to Israel. That's how it began, 74 years ago. This is an unsolved equation. Guys, you can't solve it. You can't solve it. The only thing, the only X that can solve this equation is technology. We basically had to figure out how to survive here, both from safety, defend ourselves, as well as eat, and like wash ourselves and drink, and not die from diseases. And the only way to do that with 600,000 people, half of them are Holocaust survivors, the only way was technology. So technology actually started not 25, 30 years ago. The ecosystem of tech, the economical ecosystem of tech started 30 years ago. Technology was what we created to actually make it. Okay? And it started with water tech because we needed water, and that's why desalination, Israel is leading in desalination technology in the world. And then it...
Just to say, desalination.
Desalination.
Yeah.
Thank you. Desalination. Cherry tomatoes were created here, or a breed of them was created here. Do you know why? Yeah, they use less water. Israel actually became one of the biggest exporters of fruits and vegetables in Europe for a while, based on technology. So water tech, agri-tech, cyber, defense, like basically every industry with tech at the end. At the beginning, was created merely to live. And then 30 years ago, we started to understand how we can actually commercialize this heavy R&D and research and deep technology that was created there and make it actually an enormous part of the economy. But Startup Nation is about our grandparents' generation that started this country. And then later on, with technology becoming a rooted part of what makes Israel exist. This is why for us to work in the tech ecosystem is not just fun, it is fun. It's not just great money, it is great money. But it's a core part of our generation Zionism. And I'm not shy, I'm not afraid to say it. The reason why I do what I do, the reason why I joined Meta, because I knew that I can work with many Israeli startups and help them grow. And it's doing a small part of what my grandparents did 74 years ago when they started this country. And for us, technology and startups is not just about innovation, and it's not just about economical growth. It's about the existence of the country.
I want to make one concluding comment because we have to finish up after what Adi said now. I'm not going to measure my words because Adi said we shouldn't be politically correct. But there is an era of great divisiveness in the world right now. And you have people not talking to each other on political grounds and other grounds. And as you heard Adi said before, in answer to Mackenzie's question, she's secular, she sees from me. I'm religious. I don't know what we do or don't agree on politics or religion or other things. But there is a mutual bond of friendship and trust that transcends everything. And I think if you take one other thing away from your trip here, it's that mutual responsibility in putting, the Zionism and the greater cause and other people, as Adi mentioned before, empowering women to do the jobs ahead of who we are, and doing this for the common and mutual good. If you take that away from Israel, you have hopefully learned a lot from what's going on here. And it's a truly mutually empowering society where the love and respect transcends whatever we may think differently about. And so thank you, Adi, for doing this. And thank you, Sigali, for arranging this. And thank you all for coming and listening.